I also want to tie this idea back to something, Lee, that came up when you used the word marathon earlier, as a better word, and having these moments where we can say like, oh yeah, I can question myself and say like, can I be doing things better? I think it's such an important skill for all of us to develop, this idea of asking ourselves if we are wrong, instead of saying we are set in our ways and this is how it should be, and because it's how it's always been and it seems to have worked okay for me, therefore I'm not changing anything. I'm not going to assume that I have anything new to learn. And I'm going to use that as a transition into our next topic. As I introduce this, our next topic is problematic artists. And actually, fortuitously, so as we've been talking about this topic, problematic artists, around Mystery Box Show HQ these past couple of weeks, we've sort of been subtitling it, "Can I still like Harry Potter?" But we actually wanted this to be a broader topic of conversation than just Harry Potter. But I think that's going to be a good lens to use, especially given events of the past 6 months with J.K. Rowling. If anybody doesn't know, I'll give a quick highlight reel. But actually, with great timing this morning on Glamour.com, I'll give a shout out to the journalist Abby Gardner, who basically wrote a timeline of everything that has happened with J.K. Rowling and some comments that were made. But let's see how to break this down quickly for anybody who isn't up to speed on this. About 6 months ago, J.K. Rowling, the creator of Harry Potter, began to express some opinions that hinted at the idea that she might not fully embrace the reality of transgender people's identities. And more fans looked to J.K. Rowling to sort of amend her comments and clarify her position, hopefully saying, like, oh, no, what I meant was. But she appeared to double down more and more on her initial comments, leading people to see her as transphobic, or this term, if you're not familiar with, a TERF, which TERF, which stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. Other examples you may have heard of this are, for example, women-only spaces or music festivals, for example, who deny access to trans women because they're not seen as being genuinely women, or invading a safe space. So, like I said, we're not going to try to make this a discussion specifically about J.K. Rowling, but that will be the primary lens we use, because the upshot of this specific example is that millions upon millions of Harry Potter fans who fell in love with the series, including many LGBTQ Harry Potter fans, just found the entire Harry Potter universe embraced the differences in people, and bullies are vilified, and the acceptance of everybody was the aspiration for everything. And now with these comments from the creator of that universe that seems to be antithetical to that embracing, what do we do with this? And obviously J.K. Rowling isn't the first artist, nor will she be the last that the personal opinions and politics appear at odds with the work they create or the fandom that's been created. So the question is, what do we do with this? How do we compartmentalize? Do you compartmentalize? And I would imagine that we've all had experiences like this with the art that we've loved or the artists that we have questioned. So with that, I'm going to bring the panel back and ask anybody if they would like to open the conversation. Reba.
I would like to open, please, because this topic was my baby. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, and when all this came out about J.K. Rowling, I've been saying this for weeks. I was like, I need therapy around this. Like, what are people doing? I can't, I can't wear my Harry Potter hoodie anymore, or God forbid, like have someone else see me wearing it, because what will they think that I think about them, or about trans people, or about do I support her, or like, it's just so confusing and awful for me. And so I talked to a few people here and there, and a couple people said, well, there've been lots of problem artists throughout history. I think the one person I asked said, I still listen to Michael Jackson. And what I've come to, there's a disconnect for me, I think, which is a lot of the problematic artists in history, and that's all different artists across all different mediums, they're no longer here in the present. So there's a disconnect. It's more forgiving for some reason. We can divorce the artist from the art because they're not in modern times living our reality with us. That's how I'm perceiving this. And so with J.K. Rowling, she is here living in our present and very much a part of our everyday reality, and like integrated into the clothes I wear, the things that I say, and the magic realism books that I love, that all came from Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know what to do with it.
I'd like to share one thing that what your comment is specifically bringing up. There are a million ways into this conversation. It's one of my favorite conversations as well. I'm glad you brought it up. But I think what you're speaking to, Reba, is this feeling of feeling complicit in somebody else's hate, right? Because you've supported with capital, you've given money to this person, and with like Michael Jackson, with dead artists, like you don't necessarily, a person might not necessarily feel as guilty because they're not actively financially supporting a person's agenda in the world, right? And so I think that this comes down to a personal exploration of like what this art means to me, and do I feel like I'm still allowed to love it? And I think that this is where I get a little bit frustrated with this current kind of cultural movement towards standing, where we act as though every artist is not a real person, and politicians aren't real people, and I don't mean to minimize hate, right? Like I'm not suggesting that there's a huge scale of like somebody said something crappy once to somebody's funding hate groups, right? And I'm not suggesting that we're talking about any artist that's anywhere on there, but I think that what any individual has to do is like examine, like, I know plenty of trans people who have been very harmed by J.K. Rowling's words. And just to correct your timeline, Eric, this goes back way longer than 6 months. She has been very virulently hateful for years. It's reached the mainstream, but people have known about this for a while.
Thank you for that correction.
Yeah. But at the same time, I know so many trans people who have been so deeply moved by the Harry Potter universe, who've invested so much emotional energy into this world. And I would never tell any person that they cannot love something anymore because the creator is a hateful person. And I think that would, any person who tries to be an arbiter as to what somebody else can find joy in is immediately suspect in my mind. But I think that this is why it's such an interesting topic, is we're also talking about capitalism. We're also talking about supporting art. We're also talking about, how our interactions with an artist and the art are separate and at the same time the same. And so I think this is where, teasing that out for oneself is a really useful skill set, and it's a really useful technique for anything, because so often what happens now is you find out that your favorite poet said something shitty 30 years ago, and now you wonder if you can still enjoy that poetry. And I think that this is where a little bit of resilience around understanding like how difficult these conversations are, and how your own kind of moral stance on what your feelings are about how you want to personally engage with art, I think is a really great place to start.